I'm sure there's some interesting interaction with your work. We now move on to our fifth speaker, Robert Schwertner. Robert,
yes.
over to you.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity to speak. When we have heard now these talks on blockchain, I would like to bring it back to the social impact. That's where I want to be touched. That's where I want to be seeing this technology being used. And I'm an enthusiast of blockchain since 4 years and into that matter deeply. But 2 months ago, I was on a conference, actually I moderated a conference in Bangkok, and there was a panelist from a central bank advisor. And he said, to Singapore Central Bank, and he said a very interesting thing. He said, what is the core of blockchain? The core of blockchain is that it reflects the social relations we have. When I talk to you now, I talk directly to you. There is no intermediary, there is no middleman who transponds, it's me. And I found this very touching, and I found this really, this is a bit different to the internet, where we have servers somewhere in countries. Blockchain does not know borders, does not know countries. It's a platform, it's not confined to frontiers and borders. So we have a new quality here, and this technology can enable that. As I was so active in this blockchain sphere, I realized there are lots of scams, fraud in this sphere. I invented kind of the hashtag Return on Society, ROS, Return on Society. I wanted to be part of projects which make sense to people, which have a growth potential, and it can be for refugees and groups which are have difficult situations, but it shall also reach the masses, this 99%. And for me, it's really hard in an exercise to reach out to the people, to my parents, to my neighbors, to my friends. How can this be achieved? And as this sphere is still dominated by IT experts, by cryptographers, we need more creatives, we need more stories, and that's where that's the direction I go. When I entered this blockchain sphere, it was really hard to understand what is a transaction. It's really like the internet. We use it now, but actually, do we really know how it works? And blockchain shall be the same. In terms of application, I try to find projects which make sense, which reach the masses. I'm on a fan project, it's a fan platform. They try sports fans, Ronaldinho support this and other famous players. It's to reach the masses. One can argue, and researchers maybe will find that this is not a pure blockchain case. But if we are too pure and focus on these 1% super pure cases, it will stay small. But I want projects which really reach the masses. Another project is, for instance, vault security. It's a kind of registry to register goods. Yeah, I want, it's for anti-theft, anti-crime. So an energy project, and here I come from the energy field. I managed for the Austrian government 10 years the City of Tomorrow program. It's a research program with an energy focus, but also was always our question, what's the social impact of research? And there we can learn from. What I try to do is to develop indicators. How is the social impact of a project? When we have heard wonderful cases, music, data protection, and what's the impact? How can we reach these people? How can we reach out? And finally, I would like to say, when we have a look at these cryptocurrencies which dominate the market, still in thinking, because obviously it's this greed, this hope. Yeah, I also developed this term BAAR, blockchain as a religion. We believe we will become rich, we will become famous. Yeah, it's a human, it's very natural, it's fine. I also want to be famous. I also want to maybe rich and have a good life. It's very legit, very, very rightful in a way. Why not? But governments, and that's where we could see what governments should do. and also parliaments in legislation. Giving the goals. What is the goal? To say clear which direction shall we go. I work a lot with Asian projects, and there they have the problem regulation. They are over-regulated. And we have other projects in Europe, we see they succeed. They have a better framework. So in the US it's also difficult. We have this so-called utility token where you can get a certain purpose, yeah? But these times are over. Utility token where you can have a purpose purchased with a token, it's over. What we have is now that we enter the security token, asset-backed tokens, where there's a value behind it. So we see a development. And there is development in this blockchain, and also we must ensure that these goals reflect the development. It's not just if we talk here and now, this will be in 2 months. No, maybe change it. So we must think that there will be changes. I work on I'm on board in 3 different blockchain projects of the 3rd generation, where Bitcoin 1st generation, the second is Ethereum, and these are smart contracts. Turns out smart contracts are actually not very smart, they're not contract. I'm sure this is discussed often. The problem is it just runs through, you cannot stop. We have the 3rd generation, you have a mutable, you can change smart contracts, yeah, they're bi-directional. If I'm a customer, yeah, and I can also change something, it's not just running through. So it's a 3rd generation, and as we know from the iPhone 3, yes, we have now iPhone 10 with blockchain number 3, maybe one day have blockchain number 10. So this in consideration, this is all in flow. But what I see is the difference, and the core difference to what we have, is this, and that's a wonderful part also, is this platform thinking in a way that all contribute to the good of all. Let me give you an example. Mobility platform. We have Uber now and other in place. They are threatened very much because this blockchain has the potential that then when I park my car somewhere in Austria, where I'm from, by the way, Vienna, park somewhere, and it's right next to the office, it's very convenient for me. But for the shop owners, these little shops there, they hate me because they want their parking lot free, that customers come. So what I do is good for me. With blockchain, we can incentivize. If my car would be rent out, let's assume everything's digitalized, you mentioned that, let's assume I could rent out my car to someone with a key, yeah? And actually there's a system in place, drive filters, there's another mobility program. Let's assume this is possible. I would think, okay, if I get £100 a day paid for my car, just having another person riding it when it's there one day, I could think, okay, where's the best parking lot for my car? Maybe it's not in the front of the shop, maybe it's somewhere else, and this can be incentivized. And that's where I have this incentive. That's where the game theory, I have an incentive to do something. And that's a big difference to the internet. The internet is very one-dimensional. We do something, we give out our data, we get a nice platform, Facebook, Uber, and all. Blockchain is dynamic. And there are also developers profit from that. They can have new applications. Car owners, maybe and one platform, not just Uber, maybe we can just book the train and the metro, and so a multi-purpose platform. So that's also the directions. We will have a layer of internet, and then we will have a layer of blockchains. Now projects tend to make different, blockchains. I make my own internet, and I make also my own mobility internet, and we have 7 energy internets. And this will grow together, and maybe in the long run end up in one big system. And for that system, we need that vision. We need to have policies. We need to have goals. Which direction do we want to go? Because social innovation tells us not everything which is decentralized can stay decentralized. We must care for it, yeah? Like a nanny. We must let little child let it grow, and then it can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob, for that very energetic contribution. And I know there's a periodic story about Jedi being registered as a religion, but now blockchain might knock it off that perch before long. We now move to our final speaker of this evening, which is Sheli Gupta. If you would like to take us through your presentation, thank you.
Thanks, Damien. Thanks for everyone. And Gosha gets the credit, I think, of throwing me in the deepest deep end since we just announced European operations last week. This is actually our first public talk about humanity. Go to this slide. Come through that clearly, and actually I'm probably starting with a little bit of the end in mind here, Damien, in terms of recommendations. If everyone can see that, I apologize, it's a little blurry, but if you look on the left-hand side, so intellectual property was actually started here in the UK, actually. I didn't know that myself, actually. The statute of monopolies was actually passed in 1623. And the middle one is actually the end of slavery. Actually, that reflects more in the US, and actually the end of slavery was in 1853 in the UK. And humanity really is based on establishing data as a property right. So a little bit about myself, and I'll tell you a little bit about the company. Studied here in the UK, and then pretty much have spent the last 30 years in the US. Started and sold a couple of software companies, primarily in the pharmaceutical industry. So have had a lot of familiarity with the amount of data, unbeknownst to most people, which is scary, that is actually sold in the healthcare industry, not only in the US, but here as well as across Europe and the rest of the world. And like I said, just came over here literally about a month ago to start up the operations for humanity. We are a very new startup in the US. We're only 5 months old. Europe was not supposed to happen until next year, but I was moving here anyway, and one thing led to another. I won't bore you with the story, but we are up and running here now. So humanity is basically, the premise is everyone has the right to own their data, and that if somebody is buying and selling it, we should get paid for it. Sounds like a bold idea, and the reason you see the hashtag 31 there, if you're familiar with the 30 human rights that the United Nations passed in, I guess, 1948, they're claiming there should be a 31st human right, which is that our data should be our property. And we are blockchain based. We just announced a major partnership with IBM, so we're using the Hyperledger platform for that. And the idea is you would claim your right to your data through an app. So actually the app lab was literally just launched on Friday, so everything's happening very quickly. So I thought I'd share with you a couple of use cases that really would demonstrate the impact on people. We've actually, prior to the app even going out, we announced a partnership, a three-way partnership with the government of Liberia and a company called Imcon. So Imcon has a very interesting product. They have what's called an internet backpack. It's literally a backpack that is solar powered. You can drop it into any region, it connects via satellite, and you have pretty much instant internet connectivity. So what we're going to be doing in Liberia is we're going to be dropping these backpacks into hospitals and schools and clinics. And the population of Liberia is roughly just shy of 5 million. I think to Paul's point earlier, and he kept mentioning Kenya, and I was actually born in Nairobi, so I'm actually wondering maybe I should stay there with the opportunity that he's describing. But in Liberia, basically, the 31st human right is going to actually be embedded in those internet backpacks. So out the gate, every Liberian citizen or educated is actually going to have their right claimed out of the gate. So any data that is generated, bought or sold, we actually potentially have the ability, Damien, to actually change the GDP of that country by people actually getting paid, for transactions that are taking place. So we're not advocating that data should not be sold, because it is being sold today. It's something that's actually going to not go away, it's going to get worse. And we are going to expand out of Liberia into a number of other African countries, so Kenya being one of them, Uganda and Ghana, with a total target population of about 290 million. And I think to Paul's point earlier, the internet penetration for those 290 is between 4 and 8%. So it actually reinforces what Paul was saying, which is, they are very behind, but on the same basis, actually have the opportunity to actually leapfrog very quickly. The second use case actually with a company called Orb Health in the United States. They do chronic care management, so where there's patients who need treatment and can't get to somewhere or can't get to a doctor, they actually can interact remotely. And in that case as well, the Humanity app will be embedded in any interaction with that patient. And as they get treated, and as data gets sold, they will get compensated for it. And I'd love to chat more about it, try to keep it short and sweet. And again, thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you, and I think that's another angle that we've been looking at, intellectual property, something which is personal to someone, and their right over that. So that was interesting, and the fact that this has been since 1623, a little history lesson.
Exactly.
So we will move in now to the questions. So as I said before, for those at the back, if you could just stand up so the panel can hear the question. If you're making it to a particular individual, make it to that individual, and to the panel. Obviously, if you're named, then you answer the question, and if not, don't feel as though you have to answer every question, because it is pertinent to what you're talking about, and also it takes a lot more time. If you feel as though you've got to say something, it's better to sort of get the shorter answers out there. David, I'll move to my Vice Chairman first of all.
Thanks, David. Thanks very much. That was 6 very, very interesting talks. I've got questions. I'm fascinated by establishing data as property rights, which is really the summation of, or could be described as a summation of all of this. I mean, with banks, with data and data protection, with the creative industries, there are already established service providers who are doing very, very well out of the current status quo, who are very successful and who are very profitable. And what I wonder is, what's their incentive to make it, what Elizabeth describes as the paradigm shift of behaviour? Speaking as chair of the all-party group for music and a former failed musician, I'm thinking, Marcus, you were talking about YouTube and Apple, content providers as they currently are. What would be their trigger to make the change whereby data was properly accounted for? Because at the moment they're pretty comfortable. So would it be a new provider coming in with these services, or do we expect them to make an entire mechanical behavioural shift?
Well, yeah, good question. I mean, as Elizabeth says, blockchain itself doesn't solve anything. People have got to use it.
Yeah.
Definitely in terms of kind of big intermediaries in the creative industries, the initial response to blockchain was very resistant and sceptical, because it was presented as radically disintermediating, and there'll be no one between the artist and the fan.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, they didn't like that idea much. Some people have tried to do that, some startups have tried to do that, and they are operating, but we probably haven't heard of them because they're probably not working with household name type of artists. However, there are less radical, but perhaps more sort of practical projects that are being run. So there are startups that are working with major record labels. There's only 3 left, so there are startups working with them. There's startups working with some of the top 5 music publishers in the world. So they're using the technology because they want to reduce barriers to licensing creative works, or they want to reconcile data sets. So there are perhaps less radical use cases that could be more transformative.
So it's really new players coming to market and subverting rather than changing the behaviour of the existing.
Yes.
Sorry.
I mean, actually, sorry to interrupt, but in healthcare, so actually I'll give you a quote from Milan Kamkolkar, who's actually the chief data officer of Sanofi, major, obviously global French pharmaceutical company. And there is a status quo, you're absolutely bang on. They're buying, I think we valued the market for healthcare data at 50 billion annually. So that's what's being spent. And his statement to us was, with respect to people's personal medical data, he actually said, it is like blood diamonds in the world of data sharing. And his feeling was, and which has actually now become an advisor to our company, because he feels, if you can connect me to Damien instead of supposedly an anonymized patient record, and if Damien's willing to actually share data with me and get paid for it, they would far rather pay more and actually get data that could be used for more scientific reasons, etc. So there is a status quo that could be broken. I think there's going to be new players coming in, because if the people who are the incumbents don't change, I think they're going to face new competition very quickly.
Forced to change.
Yeah.
Can I add something to that? So I think that the way that you disrupt the status quo, the way that you achieve that paradigm shift, is you challenge the underlying assumptions that have created the situation in the first place. So one of my biggest concerns around data ownership is, having been a lawyer that's negotiated many of the contracts and many of the agreements where parties are negotiating ownership over data, if we accept the same assumptions, which are that data is owned and this data is contractually negotiated, we end up with the same situation that we have. So if we extend what we have, for example, in the ad tech world, to data at large, then we'll end up with the same broken model. So we need to challenge the fundamental assumptions. Now, from my perspective, data ownership is very dangerous. The reason that the GDPR doesn't talk about a data owner is because it's about fundamental rights. It's about civil rights, constitutional rights, human rights. It's about civil liberties. It's about control, and it's about all of the things that enable us to be us. And as our data becomes a proxy for us, it's even more important that we don't sell ourselves, right? So I think that there's a real risk in accepting the assumptions that have been fed to us by the big corporates, the big silos, the big platform providers, the ones that we mentioned that I know intimately, and unpacking those assumptions and challenging how we got here in the first place. If we don't, then they'll just co-opt all the new ideas that we're coming up with, and we'll implement them better and faster, and we'll end up with the same problems that we have now.
Anything else from anyone else?
Yes, there is one point in terms of when we talk about data protection, it's always all about that we give our data away. I like the 31st human right, by the way. My data, my own business. That's really nice. It's from my evidence. What the problem with the data is, on a business model approach, do we have a problem with data? We hear every day 50 million there, hacked, 100 million there. Really? Is this the problem? Is this a problem? I don't think so. But in the healthcare sector, and we have also a project out there, it could be very interesting to get new data. Liver cancer patients could sell their data and then make a profit, and not just doctors sell it. But people who are, so there is a chance to incentive that, but it must be done very carefully. It's a lot of regulation, and it needs yes, especially when it comes to emerging market with less strict law enforcement.
I just have two sentences literally on this. You asked about how to disrupt the existing incumbents. I would argue part of the answer is that we'll see these things happen first where there aren't existing incumbents. And that's part of why I'm saying a lot of this will happen first in emerging markets. The policy implication of that and the risk is that the existing incumbents here will try to encourage all of you as parliamentarians to erect barriers to Britain doing business with the new disruptors where there aren't existing incumbents. And I think part of the policy challenge will be, if we reach a point in 5 years' time where some of these technologies are fundamental, for example, to how business is done in most of Africa, but here in Britain are still seen as somewhat marginal, are we going to shut those technologies out of our economy and thereby disadvantage the people who are using them to innovate elsewhere? So I think we need to be very conscious of the fact that oftentimes existing incumbents will be trying to prevent new innovators other places from accessing our market.
So we've got work to do as politicians. There's more work. I think the thing that you find is that we're a blockchain startup farm trust, and we're trying to get into the healthcare sector. I'm not telling you now that many of the incumbents are blocking our way.
Yeah. Is your point on this or a different one?
It's on a different.
Bring them to the UK.
Some really great evidence and some great discussions, and it's fascinating to see sort of the different angles and themes. I suppose My question is around the business models today whereby data is valuable. If we are talking about disrupting those, doesn't data become invaluable? And therefore, so Facebook, your mate, he obviously makes a vast amount of money, as Google, Facebook, all the rest of them, because of our data is worth money. So what happens if the business model changes and we go to this very nice world of I own my data and I get paid for my data? Who's actually going to pay me? Because the whole ecosystem, which funds Facebook, etc., disappears. So it'd be great to just sort of hear views on how that could make happen.
I think one of the very cute things that happens when Facebook and others are, here in a regulatory environment or before government, and they are asked about their free service. And I think we have to do away with this mythology of the free service. There are service models, and there are very traditional legal constructs we can use and business models we can use for services where they're valued, and we can attach a value to the service, and we know what the service is. I think this idea of there's a free service, but really, as you mentioned, we're making a very profitable business off of your data on the back end, is something that we can't persist with, because that's kind of the mythology we've all bought into. And that's where I go back to challenging the underlying assumptions. I absolutely agree with you that, if you take the data that has become, and I really don't like this analogy of the oil of the economy, and you devalue it, then there has to be a better business model. And there has to be a service being provided. It's a service that's meaningful and transparent, that actually adds value to your life. So I think that's spot on.
To talk to how they get paid, because I probably didn't talk about that, but the U part of humanity is actually going to be a cryptocurrency. So you can choose to get paid in U or cash. And it's getting legs pretty quickly in the States in terms of what we're proposing. Again, for the reasons I mentioned earlier on, in terms of getting more accurate data and being able to get connected to the individual themselves.
Just sort of related to this, the one thing that slightly concerns me is I have these battles in my own head, is you've talked about there's areas which will take up change more quickly and that tends to be developed. And we see something similar in pharma in the 80s, where actually that becomes a playground or the experimental ground where these things are tried, and these things can be horrendously wrong. So I'm involved in a few projects in that kind of area. That's the ethics we face. What protections are you putting in place to make sure that all the trials out there aren't going to cause more harm? A good example is with Facebook again, Myanmar, and what's happened there. We will provide a free internet service to everyone. It equates internet with Facebook, and all of a sudden the stuff happens. So I know this is a bit of a stretch from there, but when you consider using that as your place of first uptake, what are you going to do to stop that happening?
I know Nikita wants to make a comment on this as well.
So my comment on data here is that I actually one of these people who do think that data is oil. And the idea, of course, is that in the past technological revolutions, whether there's air, steel or oil or gas or coal, that has to flow as freely as possible and as much access as possible in simple engine that actually are the groundbreaking for the emerging industries. And the issue with data here is the same. And if we start to put price on data really high, I do understand they need to be shared, it's incentive to share them, but if you put the price on data, this is the wrong direction to start the growth cycle. We need to make the price as low as possible, and we have business models that can actually get by in that way. The only times I've heard about data being to be paid is when we discussed unemployment and what are people going to be doing. But this is solving a totally different problem. The issue with data regulation, in my view, is that there's almost too much emphasis on ownership and too little emphasis on data use, and we need to move policy and regulation away from only focus on ownership to get encouragement for the use. And there we have a problem that as soon as it's used, we like this, and then we give people more ownership by, like, we have to accept all cookies, we have to opt in, opt out. We have to say yes. You can spend the full day deciding whether you should be. We can share your data here, there, or your help your family and children with what they can share. That's not the way forward. The way forward is we have some general regulation. We lift up the bar. There's so much data can be shared. There's no big issues in it, and then we can fuel the economy.
Any of the panel want to reply to that?
So I'd actually quite like to say something. Again, I hate using metaphors, but data is kind of the engine of our economy. But one thing I want to highlight is I don't personally see a world where Facebook is going to be giving you cash in hand for your data. I think much more likely, cash in hand or token in hand, whatever we want to call it. I think it's much more likely that what will happen is if we are to move to this world, it'll kill off the free lunch that is Google and Facebook, and instead what you'll get as a reward for sharing your data is the use of that service. But it'll be much more transparent because you'll actually get the features that your data is worth, and therefore there'll be a transparent value chain created that doesn't exist right now. So I don't see, as a lot of some of the idealists see, people getting directly rewarded by Facebook or Google. I see them being rewarded in the service that they're already consuming for free, untransparently.
Anyone else on the panel want to?
Can I just build on that slightly? So, I mean, we're talking about personal data, but this transition has already happened many, many times in B2B. So I can talk about it in finance. It used to be everything flowed through Bloomberg. They got it for free. They sold it. They made an enormous business. Now people say, actually, that transaction I did, it's still my data. I want to sell it here separately. You have alternative data brokers who support that. I'm sure Sheli, and I don't want to put you on the spot because I just met you, but I'm sure you can talk about the same thing in healthcare. The only difference between a B2B use case and a B2C use case is scale. If this transaction can happen in B2B where businesses take back ownership or take back the rights to benefit from and choose how to monetize their data, then those same models should be able to be applied to consumers if the interface is right and the scale problem is solved.
Again, not to hop on too much about the pharmaceutical industry, since I've certainly made a living in it. But I think the feedback that we've generally received from, won't name some of them, but there's pretty much some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. There's a guilty feeling there. They know they're buying data. And I mean, when I tell my friends that your prescription, and it's happening here as well, when you go and get a prescription, that prescription is being sold. They claim they removed your name, but your name is sitting there somewhere attached to that prescription. But they'll sell your age, they'll sell your general geography. It's then aggregated, and then the industry claims that, well, I don't really know who you are. But there's this, I think there's this underlying guilt. They do know what they're doing, and they're spending a ton of money doing it. So when you actually approach them with something different, say, look, here's a mechanism we propose that you could actually get more transparent. I think we talked about transparency and trust, and where you can absolutely guarantee that it is Damien. Then there's an openness to say, okay, let's look at it. So there are, where we're focusing on healthcare, obviously, is a massive industry that's pretty well entrenched. But so far, 5 months into it, we're getting fairly favorable responses. So.
Always good. Is it on this point or something else?
A question on privacy and data.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Okay, I'll bring you in. I'll go over here first.
Oh, sorry.
So I think that the question that I ask, since we're talking about data in the context of privacy in particular, where is the value is what I would ask. What specifically gives data the value that it has? And I would argue that it comes from the links, not the individual components of data, not the individual cells, not the individual transactions, but the links between transactions that gives data its value. And in as much as that's the case, the question that I would suggest that we ask, and I would ask to all of you who are dealing with data, is it unitary? When we're talking about individual persons, since this is what this particular evidence session is about, it's about people, are the data going to be unitary or not? I would argue that the value derives, in many cases, from it being unitary. And it does not need to reveal your name in order for it to be unitary. It can reveal metadata about you, such as your age or whether you have a certain license or not. It can also reveal simply that you've transacted with the same identity more than once, and that those transactions are linked. And I would suggest that if it is unitary, and these systems rely upon fundamentally unitary qualities like biometrics, are these going to bind individual persons to an entire permanent record of their transactions, either held explicitly or implicitly by different parties who want to derive value from that permanent record? And if the answer is that that record exists, even if it is supposedly by a benign organization that supposedly doesn't have access to that record directly, the fact that that person has to go back to the same unitary identity that implicitly has those links that can be exposed in the future makes it value that has been transferred from the individual to other parties. So my question to you is, for those of you who are dealing with data that can be identified with individuals, does it have to be unitary? And if so, can you change that?
Who wants to answer that?
I can start. So I'm deeply concerned about the digital footprint of society. I think in 2010 or 11, Victor Meyer-Schomburg wrote a book called Delete: The Importance of Forgetting in the Digital Age. This was before blockchain became sort of mainstream. I think with blockchain now there are heightened risks around that. I think what I mentioned before about a presumption against something that hasn't been recorded or isn't on a ledger, denying the existence of it, right? And so with something like data where there is a human right aspect, which is an intrinsic right, which doesn't need any outside documentation or extrinsic evidence, there's a significant risk to relying upon an immutable record in terms of anonymous data. And I think that the data protection regulations that we see emerging, particularly GDPR, but also ones that are trying to mimic it, are very conscious of the importance of data for legitimate purposes like research and scientific purposes, historical records, where the data is aggregated and anonymized. The use cases you described with a specific individual where the data, of course, it's personal data that's still tied to that individual and stored in the immutable ledger, of course, are the ones that we're most concerned about. And that is where the vast majority of blockchain projects now, I think, are finally recognizing that you would never store any kind of personal data on any kind of ledger. That said, we don't have perfect solutions right now for where you would store that data and how you completely decouple and delink that data from any correlatable kind of record around an individual, which is why I think that we have to be, again, very mindful around governance of this technology and cannot trust in a technological solution, particularly where there's a path dependency that it can't be reversed. So I think that you have to look for the projects that are engineering. This is something that we do at Everynym, we call policy engineering the law and policy into the design of the technology, so that we can be sure. And of course, that's still not a perfect science, but it's something where if that isn't even part of the design of the product engineering, then you're already starting from a sort of faulty proposition. But it's a big concern, and I do very much recommend that people read the book Delete in light of the blockchain ecosystem that's emerging.
So is it unitary?
Well, I mean, it depends whether the data is fungible or not. So it's not term in law, but certainly there's pseudonymous data, right? There are degrees to which the data is still correlatable.
So then, yes.
Okay, thank you. I've got 4 people and also to ask questions, so we can try and keep all of the answers as succinct as possible in the disagree.
One point to the unitary, yes and no. I think it's yes, because every crime is linked to identity. So if there is no crime not linked to identity, it's always linked to identity. So data need to be protected, but it's unitary, so that it's important, this part. But no, because I'm also an actor, fashion. So I have a lot of identities. I'm also father, I'm writer, I'm singer. I want many identities. And when we touch the people, we can have just one big set of data. That's you. No, I'm more than that.
Okay, so
Yes, you and then, yeah.
Was it me?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to ask this question to the panel. We have been working with quo. I don't know whether we have the ability to do that. But assume that everything is okay and the technology works fantastically, which is a big assumption, but I don't want to dispute that. Ultimately, the business model of decentralizing data makes the assumption that the consumer, as we know what we are doing, and ultimately apply to us the panel, and this is a strong assumption, who is going to educate the public and who is the responsibility for educating the public. Because in my experience about privacy, whether it has to do with the blockchain or not, educating the public who has to make the decision, it is very hard. So I really would like to know, out of this business model, how do you see the education of the public who ultimately needs to either sell or not sell this data and probably also decide the price?
So, yeah, if you come and make a point, then I'll go. And
I'd like to ask how much work's being done on the definition of what is personal and what is private, because to me that's a fundamental issue, because a lot of people, totally agree with the gentleman over there about the use of the data, and aggregating the data is where all the value is. And to me it just comes back to protecting the individual by defining what is personal and what is private to me. And if by giving up some information it can be traced back that it is me and reasonably identifiable, then that's personal and private. But if you can't reasonably identifiable that it is me from a list, then why is there an issue? We should be aggregating that data as quick as possible. So has enough work been done here by the regulators and the policymakers on defining what is personal and what is private?
So if the panel that are answering that, if they could do it in 30 seconds and answer both points, I'd be immensely grateful.
So the first question?
But we'll leave.
Okay, so the first question, I think the answer to that, and obviously I say this as an academic, from an academic institution, part of the role that we have in society, aside from educating people through traditional degrees and through research, actually part of our role is educating society as a whole and being involved in that process. But I also think there is a role in the education of the value of data for government and for the consumer regulation aspect of it, which of course we can then enforce the companies to then do. Because of course they're not going to do it if we don't incentivize them to do it. And you can either have the carrot or you can have the stick of regulation. And I think that in the case of data brokerage, and data markets, if we're going to be encouraging people to sell their own data, we have to tell them what that actual value is, rather than deceiving them in a way that says, you know, that it's worth less than it is. Yeah.
Anyone else on the panel?
I'm a private, so it's a false dichotomy. There's no such thing as private data law. So personal data is can be something that's widely known, your address, your date of birth, your name, but it still needs to be protected in the way that it's used. So the law is not looking at whether something's widely known or not. There are degrees of something that you might consider secret, right? Something that only you know or that you've shared with a couple of other people, that you've disclosed to a wide array of people, and there's a spectrum there. But in terms of something that's private, that's not a useful distinction in law. The useful distinction is who have I shared that information with, what have I authorized them to do with it, how have they shared it, and have they exceeded the scope of that authorization, and what's the impact on my rights? So I think we need to move away from this notion of public and private, and we need to think about the impact of the data, because the same data used in a different context has a very different impact from the data used, you know, amongst in a personal relationship.
Just to let you know, I have very few minutes left. I've got two questions that I want to bring in, so I'll bring the gentleman here first, and if you'd like to ask.
Sure, yeah, I'm going to be very quick. My name is Alan Zahira, ex-PwC here just left, and I was helping companies in the blockchain community in ICO raise some significant amount of money for my clients. And as it now, working as a CFO, company who raised several hundred million in ICO. So my question is, I think we broadly we're talking about big data already. I think everything is really scalable. And I can see that the data, it's increased from 1 zettabytes to 6 zettabytes only in 5 years, and now it's expected to be 50 zettabytes by 2025. So it's a huge issue. I understand that the blockchain, that's what we're discussing, that could probably solve the problem, and MICE and GDPR and all that stuff. The biggest challenge that I can see in the market at the moment is really the cost of building anything on blockchain. people just cannot afford it. Even the larger organization tried to do something, they couldn't afford it. So that is one side. The second side, of course, the use case. Is the market really ready to adopt blockchain technology as it is, including the cost, including the other new ways of working and stuff? So it's really, that is my big question.
And again, the challenge for me is if you can do it in 30 seconds. 3 minutes. Anyone want to take that?
I'll take a very quick version of it. So it certainly is ready in places where the cost is already even higher, because what exists there is so poor.
Well answered. Lady at the back.
I might stand up just so I can talk to everyone. My name is Catherine. I'm from Outlier Ventures, which is a VC that invests in blockchain and DLT. We are investing in Everynym, so I am quite biased. But I'm going to stir the pot a little bit with my question. It kind of develops on the data protection, kind of building Web3 angle. So we invest in what we see as building Web3. So we see data silos which will lead to AI monopolies. And my question is more, how do we protect people from these data monopolies and AI monopolies? Because if we imagine an ideal future, and if we imagine a very negative future, the question to the panel is, what do those look like? What does this kind of FANG monopoly future look like? And what does a very democratic data future look like? And how can we actually skew that using blockchain? So thank you very much.
So you've got a very good.
Yes. First of all, we don't know, to be honest. We don't know how it looks like. But at least AI needs to have a limited by law or so. There needs specific law regulations for AI.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to have to bring the meeting to a conclusion. I would like to thank all of you for attending another very well attended session, very interesting. But I think it remains to us to just thank our guest speakers tonight.